als cameraman. Haalde daar een beetje roem mee in 1946 met A Matter of Life and Death. Haalde zelfs een Oscar met zijn cinematografie voor Black Narcissus. Werkt onder andere samen met een hele hoop bekende mensen, waaronder Hitchcock, King Vidor, Humphrey Bogart, Marilyn Monroe, Sophia Loren enzovoort. Regisseerde onder andere ook zelf films, waarvoor hij in 1960 erkenning kreeg met Sons and Lovers. Mutations promoveerde hem tot cultregisseur. Hij werkte later ook nog op films als Cannon the Destroyer en Rambo 2. Hij is deze jaar onze gastregisseur voor de workshop, de zevende workshop van het festival.
Bonsoir, ce soir nous recevons donc Jack Cardiff. Jack Cardiff est né en 1914 et il sera surtout connu pour être le premier caméraman à utiliser une caméra en couleur dans les années 30 en Angleterre. Considéré par beaucoup comme le meilleur chef-op du monde, il dirigera la photo sur plus de 70 longs métrages, parmi lesquels Les Vikings, Sous le signe du Capricorne de Hitchcock, Mort sous le Nil, Les Chiens de guerre, Rambo 2, Cat's Eyes, Amityville 3D, de Red Shoes, pour ne citer que quelques-uns. Il sera également le réalisateur d'une quinzaine de films tels que Mutilation, Girl on Motorcycle, Le Dernier Train du Katanga, Le Liquidateur, Son and Lover et Mayesha. Après 65 ans de carrière, en fait, Jack Cardiff recevra un Oscar en 2001 pour l'ensemble de celle-ci et nous sommes heureux de l'accueillir pour sa participation au 7e atelier créatif du festival.
Mr. Cardiff, you were one of the only cameramen to work for Hitchcock. Yes. How was it to work with him, and can you tell us something more about it?
Well, Hitchcock was unique in a way because he was the only director I know who...
Un peu de silence, s'il vous plaît, merci, par respect.
Who would work for a long time on the script until everything was perfect. You know, a lot of other directors, they work on a script and they say, okay, and in the middle of the picture they change it. But with Hitchcock, every page had to be 2 minutes long and the dialogue had to be right. Sometimes you would have more than one writer, you know, because the dialogue was so important. And he was very meticulous, and when the script was finished, all his ideas, his creative ideas, went into that script. And he had certain ideas which should be copied. For instance, you know, sometimes in a film you have 4 or 5 characters, you know, and they look alike, some of them, you know. You say, oh, isn't that the one? No, not that one. No, that's the other one, you know. And you're confused. Hitchcock was very sure that each actor had to look different from the others, you know, very important. And I worked with him twice. The first time when I was a very young boy, and the next time when I was a cameraman, I worked on a film where we shot the whole reel in one take. And that was the most difficult film I ever photographed, but that was interesting. But he was a very interesting character.
I have a question about your beginning in the film industry. You were one of the first who worked with a color camera in England, a Technicolor camera. Can you speak about that? And that
yes, Technicolor came to England, and there I didn't know about it. I was working as an assistant operator. And I came home one night and my mother said, Jack, you have to go back to the studios. And I said, oh my God, why? You know. And she said, oh, there's something called something color, Technicolor, I think it is. They want to interview half a dozen operators to choose someone to work with them on their first Technicolor picture. So I said, oh my God, I had to drive the car back to the studios at night, and I had to be interviewed. Those who had been interviewed came out of the room shaking because the questions were terrible questions, very technical questions, you know, all about laboratory work, about optical work and things. So when it came to my turn, they started to ask me questions. And I said, excuse me, gentlemen, I think I'm wasting your time because I know very little about these things. I'm a mathematical dunce and I'm not very clever at all these questions. And they said, well, how do you expect to be successful as a cameraman? I said, well, I'm very fond of painting. I love paintings and I know about light and which paintings use this light and so on. And they said, which side of the face does Rembrandt light? So I took a chance on that one and I said on this side, and for the etchings, of course, it would be reversed. This was a big bluff, you know. Anyway, the next morning I was astonished that I had been chosen. I had been chosen to go to Technicolor and start with Technicolor. And I was with them for many years. I was working in the laboratories and I learned all about the cameras and the Technicolor system. That's how I got started.
It was with three films.
3 films together. The camera was a wonderful camera. It was like a Rolls Royce for cameras, you know. And what happened was there was a prism with a sputtered mirror in the middle, like that, at an angle. And the light came through the lens onto one gate here. And the prism allowed the light to come through 25%. Then the mirror was sputtered and reflected 75% onto this gate, which had 2 films together. And so red, blue, and green, and it was that system which worked. The prism had to be taken out every 3 days to be checked to see if it was accurate. And the accuracy allowance was 8/10,000ths of an inch, which is fantastic. I worked on travelogues all over the world with Technicolor, and the poor assistant had to take the camera to be checked on the prism every few days, and it was looked after very carefully. It was quite an experience.
You already worked for a long time in cinema, and your work covers almost all the history of cinema. Is technique, did technique have a big influence and importance to your work and to what cinema is today? And
yes, I think I was lucky to work with some very good directors, Michael Powell, Hitchcock, John Huston, and King Vidor. They were interesting directors to work with. And of course, you learn, in the film business, you learn by working and working. They had no schools when I was young. I wish they had, but they had no schools then, so you had to work in a very low capacity. I started as a child actor in 1918, and then in 1928 I was obliged to work because my father was ill, and I worked to get any job in the studio, anything. I didn't know what, so I had a job to bring tea for people. I used to get drinks. The director had a problem, and I had to give him water all day, Vichy water. That was my job, my first job. People think that I was interested in photography and enthusiastic about photography, and it's not true. I had no idea about photography. I wasn't interested. And what happened was that I was getting tea for people and running around as a kind of office boy, and I realized that the boys in the camera department used to go abroad. They used to go to Paris, to Rome, you know, and to Spain, and sometimes to Egypt. And I thought, that's for me. So I didn't join the camera department because I was enthusiastic about films. I wanted to see foreign countries. And eventually, of course, I joined the camera department, and I learned to be enthusiastic about films. That's how I started.
But technique. You saw all the evolution of the techniques in film, like the color film, maybe digital film afterwards, and so on.
Yes, you learn slowly by being on so many films. I was on over 100 films over 70-something years. It's a long time. And in that time you realize, obviously, you learn a lot. And obviously, to me, it became apparent that I wanted to direct as well. And the big problem about being a director is that you have to understand the importance of having a great writer who writes dialogue, because dialogue is a very important thing. You have to get good dialogue. Hitchcock was always getting the best writers to write the best dialogue. And the writers I worked with, they taught me many things. That the basic thing about good writing scenarios is conflict. If I say to you, it's a nice day, you say, I think it's terrible. That's better writing. If you say, yes, it's a nice day, it's not interesting, it's dull, you know. It has to be a conflict. But that's simple. It gets more complicated. What is interesting is the fact that if the dialogue, sometimes the good writers have a fantastic ability to make it more interesting. What is a big problem, I think, it is today the same. If you have a book, which is a fantastic book, a big success, and the studio people say we must buy this book and make a great film. So they buy the book, which costs a few $1 million, and they get a writer who is, they say, the best writer, and they give him $1 million to write a scenario. And this writer feels obliged, because he's getting so much money, to change the dialogue. And this doesn't always work, because sometimes he ruins the picture. When I directed Sons and Lovers, I carried the book with me like the Bible, you know, like a religious thing. I carried the book under my arm. And sometimes an actor would say to me when I was directing the picture, Jack, this line, I don't feel very happy about this dialogue, this line. I would say, wait a minute. And I would take the book and look up the book. And in the book, there was the perfect line, you know. So I went often to the book more than the script, because the book was so well written. This is very important. But I think directing a picture is a wonderful experience. You have to understand about so many things. And most of all, you have to be a bit of a psychologist, you know. I had an experience. In fact, I had an experience when I was a cameraman working on a film. The star was Robert Donat, who was a very fine actor, but he was not very well, and he was forgetting his lines, you know. And the other actor was Sir Michael Redgrave, who was a brilliant actor, and every take, he always remembered every line perfectly, perfect. And we did so many takes, and poor Bob was forgetting his lines. So after about 20 takes, I whispered to the director, I said, why don't you ask Michael to deliberately forget his lines once? He said, good idea, okay. So he spoke to Michael, whispered to him, and Michael said, all right. He didn't like the idea very much. And the next take, he deliberately forgot his lines. He said, oh, Bob, I'm so sorry. Bob said, that's okay, all right, that's okay. And the next take was fine, it was perfect. It's simple psychology, you know. That's how it goes. But there's a lot to it. Directing is, the director, the cameraman has certain problems about the light, and everyone has their own problems, but the director, all the problems are concerned with him. He has to be the captain, he has to handle all the problems himself, and he has to decide everything. So that's the most important job. Cheers.
Y a-t-il une question au public déjà?
Excusez-moi, je vais parler en français. Donc voilà, quand on voit un de vos films, votre travail est immédiatement reconnaissable, votre style de photo est unique. C'est une question très naïve, celle que je vais poser, mais je n'ai pas de connaissances techniques, donc je vous la pose quand même. Comment fait-on pour travailler quelque chose aussi insaisissable comme la lumière, pour obtenir un style si unique? Voilà.
I didn't understand. Okay, I would say that I have to tell you a story because it explains a lot. When I was younger, my parents were on the stage and we used to travel to different towns. My father was a dancer and then he was a comedian. And I was just a boy of about, I think, 10 or 11. And each town, every week I went to a different town. And I went to a different school. And one school, on one occasion, the teacher said, "Today we are going to see art." Now, I had never seen a painting in my life. I had never seen any painting of any kind in my life. And we went to this gallery and we saw maybe 200 paintings on the wall. I was flabbergasted, fantastic. That was the first time. And after that, I saw immediately the wonderful colors and the light and so on. So I made it a point after that, every time I had the opportunity to go to the museums and the galleries and see paintings as often as possible. And sooner or later I became, I understood which paintings. I remembered always Rembrandt because he was obvious, and other painters. And then I got onto the Impressionists and so on. So I had a good knowledge of painters, and I realized that what was the most important thing about everything to do with painting was the light. Whether it was a long shot of a field or forest or whatever, or whether it was a bowl of fruit, light was the principal thing that dictated the composition, and the whole effect was light. So I learnt about light very early on. And after that, later, when I was in the studio and I became a cameraman, by instinct, I was thinking, well, this is a kind of Vermeer effect I want to get. And the main thing about all the lighting was simplicity. Simplicity was so perfect with all the painters. They only had one light. God only gave them one light on the exteriors. They didn't have more than one light. And the trouble with films was always the cameramen had many lights they could use. A light here, a light there, a light there. It was too many, you know. I relied always on simplicity to try and get the effect of one, like Caravaggio had one light that went through. And I copied this technique. So this was successful because when I did Black Narcissus, I kept a simple form of lighting, and that was successful. After that, I realized that was the best way of lighting.
Quelqu'un d'autre?
You work with a lot of famous people.
Allez-y.
I'm sorry, I'll speak English, I'll try. I think you might have answered partly already through that other man's question, but you've seen loads of things, obviously, and would you talk about an art of seeing things, and if yes, how would you sum it up?
The art of
Seeing.
seeing.
Not just watching, but seeing. You seem to have seen a lot of things in your life.
Yes, it's a very good, very interesting question, because I suppose what you see is what you learn, what you've learned. I mean, Degas said about Monet. He said Monet is just an eye, but what an eye, you know, and that's true. in the sense that Monet saw things, he studied the light, and he had an eye. I think it really reflects on the fact that a painter can certainly see, when he sees something, not always the light, he sees the composition. And incidentally, I'm afraid to say that the comparison between the English impressionistic time, impressionistic school, the English side, against the French, that the French side was much, much better. Because what was so interesting, still is to me, the French had a wonderful idea of composition, and the composition made the picture. And it had, that's where the French, the Impressionists were very, very successful with most of their paintings, because they had a wonderful idea of composition, and that with the light, of course, the light often made the composition anyway. And of course you can always think of this in terms of photography, because what the cameraman is faced with, it is so simple that the cameraman has to photograph a film. And what is very important, what people don't realize, is that no matter how good the cameraman is, no matter how clever he is, how creative he is, he must work under the companionship and the direction of the film director. Because it's no good him doing something fantastic which ruins the director's ideas, and they have to work together. And quite often the cameraman can help the director by saying, can we do this with one light or something? This is so obvious, but it's often that the cameraman will like something beautifully which destroys the instinctive ideas and creative ideas the director has. So they have to work together all the time. I know that it's changed a lot, because when I was younger, I worked with big directors, and they would say to me, Jack, I'd like you to get, I'd like for this sequence, I'd like you to give me a feeling of happiness, or a feeling of poverty, or a feeling of misery, or whatever. And they would say to me, I don't know how you do it, but that's what I want. But now, it's quite different, because in those days they had no schools, you know. And big directors like Hitchcock, he didn't have a school. And people like that didn't have schools. But now, a lot of the modern directors have been to film schools, and they could say, they haven't said it to me, but they could say, Jack, I want you to use the new aqua stock, because there's a higher contrast in the shadows, and by the way, always use a 3/4 backlight, because then when you use it, they will tell you technically what they want, you know, which is very upsetting for a cameraman.
Est-ce qu'il y a encore des questions? You work with a lot of famous people. What's your best souvenir of?
Best what?
Souvenir of
Oh, there's so many, so many. I was talking yesterday on television, and when I talked about it, I remembered vividly when I was working with Marilyn Monroe. Did anybody see the television last night? No? Well, my goodness. Anyway, I can tell this. I can tell the story again then about Monroe, who was putting on weight. She was getting quite big, and she had a big tummy. And she said, Jack, for God's sake, you must tell me when you see my tummy protruding too much. And I said, well, I can't call out, Marilyn, your tummy's coming out, you know. So I said, I have an idea. We'll have a secret code. And my electrician was called Tom. And I said, if you hear me call out Tom, that's my electrician, when you hear Tom, you must put your tummy in. So she said, okay, good idea. So just before we shoot, I would watch her, and the tummy would be out, and I'd say, Tom, and the electrician would come to me and say, yes, Jack, what is it? I'd say, Doesn't matter. And Tom, he said, well, what, Jack, what do you want? I said, no, it's all right now. Doesn't matter. This was very embarrassing. But anyway, it kept her tummy in. And I loved working with Marilyn because she was an incredible person. She had a natural ability to have something on the screen. We used to shoot so many takes because she forgot her lines always. And poor Laurence Olivier, who was directing the film, we'd take 1, take 2, take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, take 18, you know. Sometimes we got up to 25 or 30 takes. And he'd say, okay, that's it. And in despair, he would tell the continuity girl, for the editor, to say, well, print takes 4, 6, 7, 9, 14, and 22, hoping that they could cut them together. And that's what they did. But when we saw the rushes the next day, the projection, she was wonderful. She had something, maybe it was a vulnerability that she had on the screen that made her look so attractive. She was quite different. She wasn't a fantastic actress, but she had a natural ability that people all loved her, you know. One more cheers.
Une question publique?
There must be some more questions you want to ask.
If you had just an image, just one image that you really remember.
One image. That means one scene, you mean? One scene or one... Yeah, there were so many. So many. I mean, I can think of things that gave me satisfaction because I was able to overcome difficulties. There were some scenes where I had to what we call cheat. You know, cheat, the word cheat. When I was working with Michael Redgrave, who, funnily enough, Michael Redgrave was forgetting his lines. And he came to me and he said, Jack, this scene has so much dialogue. I have to speak this long speech. I will never remember it. You have to break it up, you know, break it up into close-ups. And it was a very important scene in Young Cassidy, the film Young Cassidy, where he's outside the theater. He has to make this long speech in the rain. It's raining. And I said, don't worry, I will break it up. I will just do little pieces. But I said, for the rehearsal, I'm doing a rehearsal, I have to use the rain in the rehearsal. And so just do the whole rehearsal, and after that we will shoot it and we will break it up. So he came out in the rehearsal, and he was absolutely perfect. He remembered all his lines, and it was raining, and he was absolutely perfect. And when the scene was over, he came running up to me and he said, oh, Jack, if only we'd been shooting. He said, oh. I said, we were shooting. And that's a print. So I had to lie to him, you know, and say it was a rehearsal. But there are scenes that I can half remember where that were very impressive. I had on Sons and Lovers really great actors. And I had on Young Cassidy great actors. Maggie Smith was a great actress. She's still alive. She's a great actress. And the last scene in Young Cassidy, when she's telling Rod Taylor that she can't go with him to America, and everybody is crying, and it's a wonderful scene. And these things move you, you know, they're terrific stuff. There's a long list, it's so long I can't remember.
You're now working the workshop here on the festival.
Yes, it's fascinating. Very interesting indeed.
Why did you accept to come, and do you like it? Or?
Well, yes, because some of my colleagues have already been over here and done it. Freddie Francis, who was my cameraman on Sons and Lovers, you know, he's a very fine cameraman. and he came over a couple of years ago, and I've done similar things in other places. The young people working on these things are very enthusiastic, and I hope very much that they will be very successful. And that's the main thing, because they have to have this enthusiasm to work, and they have to learn. It's a difficult thing for me that I don't want to interfere too much. I'm supposed to advise them, but if I advise them too much, then it becomes that I'm doing it. I don't want to do it myself. I want them to go as far as possible. And even if they make mistakes sometimes, then I can say, well, you should have done like that. But if I say, always do this and this and this and this, then that's not them, it's me. So I have to be very careful in letting them go ahead. And they are very, very good indeed. The main thing is they have tremendous enthusiasm. We have 3 films, and each of the scripts were very well done, and they're finished now, so we shall see how they worked out.
You didn't see yet any result, or?
Not yet. Tomorrow I begin to see some of the editing, and then after that more editing, whatever.
And what's for you the most important points for made a fantastic movie, even a short one? What's the most important?
Well, it has to have a. Difficult to describe it. Each one has to have a soul. It has to have something which makes a statement, and it's just like again, the writing is so important. It has to be so much that the ending is making you want to see more. It has to end dramatic. It has to have an ironic ending, which is so important, you know. But they're doing very well. Maybe in a few years' time, there'll be a few Spielbergs and Hitchcocks going around, and they'll be sitting here talking to you about that silly old fool Cardiff, you know.
Being such a busy person, what can we expect next from you in the future?
Well, I should retire, but I could never do that because I'm painting. I paint a lot. I hope to have an exhibition next year, and unfortunately some of my paintings, people want to buy them, and I let some go, but I'm hoping to do copies of them for my exhibition. And that's my main concern at the moment. I have had 3 films that I might do. One is to direct, and one is to photograph, and another one is like that, I don't know. The film business in England is very difficult, extremely difficult, because we have in England, as you know, very good actors, but they're not big stars. They're very good, brilliant, wonderful actors, but they're not stars. So if you have a good script, a very good script, and you take it to the money boys, the boys who have the money, they probably don't read it. All they do is they say, well, who's in it? Who's playing in it? If you say you have big American stars, they say, okay, how much do you want? You know, millions, it doesn't matter. But if you say, well, you have the wonderful actors, British, they're not big stars, but they're wonderful. Perfect with the scenario. They're not interested. They say, we want big names. And the joke is, if you, one of the films had a very low budget of 3 million, which is low today. I mean, Spielberg can spend 200 million, maybe 300 million, but 3 million is a low budget. And if you have a low budget picture, then you can make a very good film. But if they say, no, you must have, forget the good actors, you must have a big Hollywood star, the Hollywood star maybe gets 20 million. Now you have a big budget, which is 50 million, and the whole thing is crazy. What is lacking funny enough in England is the money people have very little faith in British films. And funny enough, one British film has been a big success. Billy Elliot was a big success, and that was a very low budget. I think it was under 3 million, and it's made over 100 million profit in the last few months. So this should influence the money boys, but it doesn't. So this is the problem at the moment, to try and get financial interest, people who believe to invest their money.
But would you prefer doing a small budget film and doing what you like to do?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not interested in the big films because of many reasons. You know, you're out on a limb, you're in all kinds of risks, and you're obliged to make many sacrifices. On a low-budget picture, you can, paradoxically, you can take more time because it doesn't cost so much, you know, and you can really get the best results. My dream is making a picture with good actors. I love good actors because they have a talent which is exceptional. Sometimes one makes mistakes, like I used to think that Marlon Brando was the greatest actor. Well, he is a good actor, but I used to say to people, you see, Marlon Brando, one thing with actors who are not very good is that they don't seem to listen. If you speak to me, they answer what it says in the script. They don't seem to listen what you said to me. You know what I mean? And I said, with Brando, they ask him a question, and he sort of thinks about it and looks up in the sky and comes down and he talks. And I said, this is wonderful. Then I met someone who had worked with him, and they said, well, I'll tell you what really happens. Brando hates the other actors, always. He hates other actors. And he doesn't like to hear them speaking. He doesn't like their dialogue. So he wears earplugs. And that's why he's looking up, trying to remember what they're saying. But the funny thing is, it always appears wonderful, you know? So you can never tell.
Y a-t-il encore une question dans le public?
Yes, Mr. Cardiff, you worked on The African Queen, John Huston. And of course, we all saw White Hunter, Black Heart, the Clint Eastwood movie. So John Huston was a pretty wild man, and some pretty wild stuff we saw in that movie. But were there stuff they couldn't put in that movie, stuff that was better forgotten, some really good gossip about that shoot?
That was a film which was made about the filming of African Queen. I haven't seen it, and I know that they made it, and it had a moderate success, I think. The film itself, The African Queen, was a fantastic picture to work on because, first of all, it was Bogart's best picture, there's no doubt about it. He got the Oscar on that picture, and Katie Hepburn was also wonderful. It was a wonderful combination, and I loved working with John Huston because he was what we call unflappable. Nothing bothered him. He was very calm, and we had all kinds of disasters happen, but he was very calm, and nothing upset him. Bogey was a great character. When I first met him, it was in a party, and at the bar, he said, Cardiff, you see this face? It's got a lot of lines and wrinkles in it. And it's taken me a good many years to get these lines and wrinkles in my face. And I don't want you to wipe them out with lighting and make me look like a goddamned idiot. I said, Bogey, I'm sorry, I've had a lot of difficult actors to photograph, but your face, I give up. There's too much debauchery there. And he laughed and said, okay. We became good friends after that. But it was a great film to work on. The filming of the film, I didn't see. I wonder if they had a cameraman. I don't think the cameraman looked a bit like me. He was probably better looking than I was. So I didn't have much interest in it because the African Queen itself was much more interesting.
Quelqu'un d'autre?
But I think we're gonna leave it for today. Many thanks for the nice interview.
Okay, it's a pleasure.
Een applausje voor meneer Cardiff.
Thank you very much.
I think some of the fans want to sign this. Faites pas trop long, hein.
Patrick. Patrick. Voilà.
Can I make a photo with you? Yes, sure. Okay, I'm coming close to you. Yes, okay.